to tell the story? Yes. One day, I'll tell the whole story. If you want me to tell the story, I have the whole story. Yitzhak, who was my husband, his father went through the most serious and respected yeshivot of Poland. He was a real Talmud scholar, a Talmud Chacham. And finally he arrived at Lomzha, which also had a big yeshiva, but there somebody made a shidduch for him, and it happened with my future mother-in-law. And okay, and that's where he lived for a short time, and the daughter was born in 1918. And in 1920, Rabbi Hilmersdorfer came from Berlin to look for Talmidei Chachamim who could be present in a university, in a German university, where German students study, and they wanted to have what they called a Rabbiner Schule, a yeshiva type of thing, with great Talmidei Chachamim who could answer students, German students, who come to them and ask them, what is the difference between Jewish view of this and the non-Jewish international? And this is a very interesting place. It's a very interesting story, and I'll tell you all the way to the end. So, okay, so they tried to enlist these Talmidei Chachamim, and a few of them went with Rabbi Hilmersdorfer to Berlin, including my future father-in-law and somebody else, I don't know who else. And they came to Berlin, they were examined, and they were found okay, and they stayed there. This was 1920. At that time, my father-in-law left behind his wife and the daughter Hadassah, who was born in 1918. And in 1922, Hitler came out with his book, Mein Kampf. And the whole project of having a university with Jewish guys teaching or giving answers to non-Jewish students, to German students, fell apart. No more. Mein Kampf started Hitler's big rise to power. But my father-in-law, future father-in-law, was living in Berlin, and he was accepted by the Jewish community. There was a great Jewish community in Berlin, and he was accepted as the Dayan. And he got a very good salary, and he went back to Lomzha, collected his wife, his daughter, and the son who was born since then. That was my husband. 1923, and he brought his whole family to Berlin, and they had a wonderful 15 years living in Berlin. And he was getting a salary. This was a governmental position to be a dayan. And he got a very good salary, and the kids went to very good schools, everything fine. Now I'll tell you the story about my husband. One day, he was coming home from school on a bicycle, and he was already about 14 years old, and he hears a funny sound behind him, and he looks back, and he sees a whole bunch of German boys shouting, Jude, 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 like in running after him to catch him. And he managed to run into some kind of house and they couldn't follow him. And that's how he saved himself. But this was the thing that he didn't forget as having been followed by these boys. Another thing that happened was that his father, with a bald bird, I have a nice picture of him in a hat, and he was caught and almost being thrown out of the train, running train. This was also very traumatic for them to hear it. So one day the German government wanted to put them across to all the Ostjuden, they wanted to put back to Poland. And luckily they avoided it. I don't know how they did it, but they were not. They stayed there, and in 1939, January, they managed to get into Palestine, the whole family, to Tel Aviv. And much as we look at it as a special grace of God that they managed to get to Palestine, they were grumbling because they didn't have money. They were very poor. And my son grew suddenly from a little boy into a tall man, and he outgrew his pants. And his pants were still half shin, and they didn't have money to buy him a new pair of pants. And Muti had to go to the committee, to the kitchen of the Jewish committee to bring home food from the soup kitchen. And it was very humiliating to them. So they were not very happy to be there, the kids. And one day, my mother-in-law, future mother-in-law, said to her husband, Rav Aviezer Cycowicz, do you know how to give Sidur Kiddushin? I know how to cook. Let's make weddings. They were in an apartment of 2 bedrooms, and they already had 6 children, so it wasn't very rich living, but they started making weddings because a lot of young people had escaped Europe when things were very hard, and they were alone, and the families got lost in the Shoah, and they were there, and so they made weddings for a minimum, what do you call it? 10 men.
A minyan.
A minyan, yes. And they paid them well for it. And then Papa got a job, and my husband went to Technion and finished there. And they were better. And so I felt that these 2 experiences that they had with the Shoah was so heavy for my husband that he didn't ask me. He didn't feel he had his own Shoah. And he never asked me, where were you?
So
Nor have they asked me in America, where I was 46 years. No one ever asked me, what happened to you during the Shoah? Didn't they know about the Shoah? Maybe they didn't. Nobody asked me. And then I came on Aliyah, and I got a job in Amcha. Do you hear about Amcha? You know about Amcha? I worked there for 28 years. That's a long time. And I am so much Amcha. And I believe so. And I was treating Holocaust survivors, where I was the same Holocaust
but
survivor.
I think you being a Holocaust survivor, you as a psychologist were treating patients who were also survivors.
But nobody knew how it will come out. But the way it came out was very good for me and for them. Because they
you
didn't
could
have
understand.
to explain.
You could understand.
I can understand very well. They didn't have to tell me, we were sitting in a toilet where there were about 500 people sitting, men and women, one after the next to the other, that I felt touching other people when I was sitting in the toilet. Can you imagine? They don't have to explain to me what it meant. They didn't have to explain to me what it meant to be woken up at 4 o'clock at night, every night, to lie down in, what do you call this? Little stones that they put in gardens. What do you call it?
Pebbles.
Mixed with a lot of dirt. And we had that one dress. We didn't have anything underneath it. We didn't have underwear. We didn't have over something that was warm. And we just threw up. When they woke us at 4 o'clock at night, we threw ourselves on the floor in that dirt because we were extremely tired. And we woke up about an hour later when the SS got ready to count us and lined up in 5 in a row. All the 1,200 women were in one barrack, and they all lined up in 5s. And the SS came on the side of these lines, counted the lines. When they came to the end, they have to have the 1,200 women. Chas v'chalila, that one should be missing. Where they killed thousands at a time, they would endlessly search for one if one was missing. The bottom line is that we had, among all the barracks, we had 30,000 women in one lager. And for that we had 2 toilets and 1 washroom, where we had to, the washroom was for 30,000 women, and the toilets were for 15,000 women. And we finished the sail upper, the misdar, the lineup, and then we stand in line to wait to get into the toilet. In the toilet, there was room for maybe 500 people sitting at the same time because they had 4 rows, about like this wide, like two of these, about 40, 50 centimeters, and the holes were on a diagonal. So from this side and from this side we could sit down. And we felt we never had the privacy of being in a toilet. Can you imagine? And I remember one story which I told at the very, very, very beginning when it was very close to when the Shoah was over. I was talking to some kind of a American women's group, and I was telling them this story. Our Zählappell was finished, over,
It's the roll call.
roll call, and we go to wait to the washroom. And we stand in line waiting for to get into the washroom until the others. It's for 30,000 women, and waiting till the others come out so that you can go in. And I remember standing there. I wasn't one of the first ones to get in. And a girl comes out, a young girl, maybe my age. I was about 17 at the time. And she comes out with a bucket of water. And I said she must be working for one of the block air testers. And she's bringing the water for her. She's allowed, if she has a bucket, it means that she has some kind of authority. And she goes in and fills the bucket and goes out. As she passes me by, I say very softly, oh, why don't you stop and give me a drink of water? And I was sure she couldn't have heard what I said, because I said it very softly. And she passes by, and then she stops. And I said to myself, she didn't hear me. And it wasn't meant to hear me. She stops and she says, come, have a drink. And I go there, and I thought, God, what will happen here? All the other girls will come and will turn the bucket over, and I mean, this is going to be a catastrophe. I go there, I take some water, I drink it, I say thank you, and she goes on. Nobody came to do any harm.
Wow.
No one. This was the first big miracle.
Gita, why did nobody ask you in America? Why did, and even in Amchai, why didn't they?
No, in Amcha also. They never, somebody who is there now says, how come they never let you talk about the Shoah? Never. I was the only, there was another girl, a Polish girl, who was 9 years old, and they were hidden, or I don't know. She was in a camp, but she was not old enough to tell about it. But never did they ask me to tell them about the Shoah. Today they see that this wasn't nice.
And when did you start speaking? You started and going to Poland?
I came on Aliyah. So my children, my oldest daughter, Nomi, who lives in Katamo, she came on Aliyah, and she married 1987 or something like this. And a few years later, she had a baby of maybe a year old, less than a year old. And she went on Aliyah, and we took her to the airport. Everybody, the whole family. And I said, who on earth told you to go to Israel? Who asked you to go to Israel? She says, you did, Ima. You and Abba. Never, I mean, we were preoccupied with Israel. Everything, newspapers, items, asking questions, sending gifts, everything was concerned with Israel. And she went to a Zionist school also. And she went, and in the same year, we had sent Zevi, my son, to Israel like we sent the girls. After they finished high school, each one went to Israel for a year, to Miklala. The girls went to Miklala, and Zevi went to Beit Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. What's the name?
It was a yeshiva. It was...
Yes, in Beit Vagan. And after the year, and we expect him home, and he says he doesn't want to come back. This is where he wants to stay. So we had, and Yael got a job the same year there was...
He was in Kol Torah.
Kol Torah, right, Kol Torah. And there was an American little rabbi, a young man, and he told us he would be better off with Rav Shmuel Auerbach, the son of Rav Shlomo Zalman, because it's a smaller yeshiva, Sharei Chesed. So he went and he stayed here. And then he got married, we came here, we made him a wedding here. We were very happy with the
And
color.
when you, Gita, when you came to Israel, is that when you started?
Wait. And yes, my husband died. No, we stayed in Israel. The children came to Israel. We stayed in America. Why? Because I tell you this also, because this was a very unusual thing. Yitzhak once came to Israel. No, he came, he worked, he was one of the engineers who established the Tasiyat Tzva'it. You heard about it? Tasiyat Tzva'it is when he finished the Technion, he was hired by the British and by the Machteret to work for them on the same project, to watch whether they see boats coming. And okay, but then the war broke out, 1948, and they decided to do something for the Tzava, and they established a workshop where they can fix. I told you probably, but I told other people that every soldier had a different arm. They didn't have anything. They had stolen or borrowed or begged or I don't know what. But they didn't have uniform arms. But they didn't even have where to fix an arm. So these guys who finished Technion and other engineering schools said we must set up something where we have the guys can come in and have fixed something. Very good. And then it became, today, if you ask about Tasiyat Tzva'it, it becomes a giant organization where they make their own weapons. And Yitzhak, my husband, was sent after the war, miyad, to Europe, to Schweiz, to Germany, not to Germany, to Schweiz, to France, to Czechia, to buy weapons. Because now we already won the war and we have more money. And he spoke French and English and German, all the three languages. So he was sent, and he became the weapon brokers there. So that was very nice. And every time he came to Europe, who went for a weekend to Tel Aviv, where his parents lived, both parents, and to Israel. And yes, so I came, so we stayed. So one day when he wanted to come, he went to his heart doctor and he asked him, "Can I go? Is my heart okay?" He had a heart doctor who liked him very much.
Cardiologist.
And he said, "You are fine." He went to him on an examination on a Thursday, and he took blood and did all the tests. But he said, "Up until these tests, you are doing fine. So you can go." On Sunday, I take him to the airport, and he takes off. And I come home, and my daughter is in hysterics. "Call the doctor, he wants to talk to you." I call the doctor, and he says, "Where is your husband?" I said, "He's in the air." "Well, take him down. He has no business traveling now in the air." I said, "You know that we cannot do that. What do you want?" He says, "Call your relatives and tell them to wait for him with an ambulance and take him straight in the hospital, because he has something with his blood." And it so happens that Yitzhak's nephew, his brother's son, is a doctor, and he's a, what do you call this?
Hematologist.
Hematologist. And he was there, and he took him to a Kupat Cholim, and immediately they took off 5 portions of blood, because his blood was thick. He was manufacturing red blood corpuscles without any control. And it's very dangerous. So they took care of him. He was with his parents. He came home. He got himself a hematologist doctor. And from then on, every month he had to go to him, and he took off blood. And he says, they said that the amount of blood that was in his body was thick. I don't know. He was an engineer, and he was a very creative engineer. He had 11 patents to his name. And he couldn't understand how he managed to work with this kind of condition. Anyway, he came back home, and this is called an orphan's disease, what he had. This is a certain blood disease which is very, very rare, so that doctors don't want to undertake to do research on it. But he found a professor, somebody, a woman doctor, who did research, and he was very happy that he had this doctor. And she started treating him, and so he couldn't go to Israel because he wouldn't leave this doctor, because in Israel he wouldn't find such a fine doctor. But what happened is that this woman really did something very neglectful, and he got very sick, and he died. And he told me when he was very sick, if I would be stronger, I would... Hello? I'll finish the story soon. So the kids came when he died on a Shabbat. Zevi was sitting next to me, and he was in a coma for 2 weeks. It was terrible. It's terrible for us. But he died, and we brought him to Israel to be buried. We all came, and he died on Yudaret of, what is it? Before Rosh Hashanah, 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, with the whole family, the brothers, the sisters, the parents were not alive anymore, thank God. And then we took him to Israel, and we said Shiva there, and Rav Burger, what's his name? He was in the Knesset.
Berg.
And
he was national religious. He was...
he's a religious man.
But
yes.
from the National Religious Party, he was...
Yes. He came to say he knew the family, Yitzhak.
Because he was originally... he was
back.
from Germany. Berg was from Germany.
So I went back to New York, where I had my job, and I worked there about 3 days. And Naomi called me, I found the apartment that you want to live in.
And this is the apartment.
I went back and bought it. And
Gita, how many times have you been to Poland?
Over 100 times.
With different groups from all over?
Well, most every year for sure. I went with Horev girls and for Or Torah. And then I went with other groups. And it was a marvelous experience for all of us. And these kids really, they are still with me. One kid was here today.
Wow.
And she wants to go to medical school, and I have to help her make all kinds of decisions. And they're so sweet. This gave me life, to be around young children. And being loved by them, and I
Gita, it's not only the trips you went on, and you've been invited to be with the German president and with President Biden.
Oh, that was a very interesting experience. Did I tell you?
It's amazing. Yes. It's a
and
big honor.
He sent me a medallion, a big medallion, and he invited me to another event here. I had to buy a dress, which cost me 1 minute.
Gita, so this is a picture of your father-in-law who was a Dayan.
Yes, and this is my daughter, my oldest daughter.
And then Gita, this is a picture of your father.
My picture of my father. I'll tell you a story about this picture. Did you hear about the Tzava building all kinds of study places in the Negev, according to the wishes of, what's the name, of the first Prime Minister?
Ben Gurion?
Ben Gurion. He's lying there
in Sde Boker,
and they started building in the
it's by the Negev.
Yes, and they have beautiful places, and they built a new Yad Vashem. A new Yad Vashem to train the Tzava there about the Shoah. Because until then, they would have these study places in the unit of the Tzaba, wherever they were. So this unit is learning it here, and the other unit is learning it in his unit. But now they built it in the Negev, and they have everyone come to the Negev and learn it there. And it's beautiful. And you know that Shani Luria, did you hear about her? You know what's happening to her? No. She didn't get married until pretty late. And then she got married to a man who was divorced, who had been divorced and has children, and had a wonderful marriage. I mean, she changed 100%. And they lived together for a few years, not many years. And he gets a brain tumor.
Oy.
And today he is in a terrible state of awaiting death.
Oy.
And but what they built it, so when they opened up this, they had my father's picture. They have a wall, a corridor, a wall full of pictures, and they tell me to put my hand up about this high and go past, and they take a photograph of me. Suddenly, I see his picture, this size, and it's on the wall, and my hand is exactly like stroking his feet.
How did they get the picture?
Okay. My mother she was liberated in January 15th. Did I tell you how? Okay. She was told by an SS, go hide, because he met my mother, where she had her cover, bed cover with the smicha tied around herself, and she found two rags with which they washed the floor and tied them on her feet. And she went out January in the cold of Poland. And she goes because the Germans announced, we are leaving the camp. Whoever wants to live, come and join us leaving the camp, because we are leaving now. And whoever wants to live will leave with us. My mother quickly got dressed like that and goes out and meets an SS. And he says in German, my mother spoke German, where are you going? And my mother said, ich will leben. I want to live, so I am going with you. And he says, if you go with us, you will not live. Stay here, hide, and I will help you. And my mother wants to run away and hide. It happened to be a brick factory where they had these big, what do you call that? They had like a chimney, and they had rows where they put the bricks to dry. And they made a fire, and my mother first ran back to the rows, picked out the 7 women with whom they were taken together, and told them to do the same. And when the Russians came in, they found 8 elderly women. They were all in their 40s. And they were talking Yiddish, and some of the Russians who came spoke Yiddish.
They were Jewish
They were
soldiers.
Jews, and they had a wonderful time. And a few days after they gave them food, the eight women whom they took away from us on Isru Chag of Isru Chag of Simchat Torah, were 7 women and one child of 14, who was the daughter of one of the ladies. And she died after the Russians came. And my mother buried her because she grew up in the house of a Rav, and she knew the ceremonies and the tefillot and everything. And she's buried there.
He said, here you have, this is when you went to Poland
Yes,
with the girls.
it's a very nice picture.
It's an amazing picture, Gita. Wow.
The man who called me now was Amichai. He was from Off Torah, and he sent me this picture.
It's amazing. And then here you have another, it's also very beautiful.
This is my grandson, David, Yael's son,
And you went
who
with him.
surprised me one day on
You didn't know that he was going as well?
No. One day, on a Friday, we usually went to Auschwitz-Birkenau on Friday, and he surprised me. When I came down on the elevator from the hotel, he was waiting with a hug, and he already made arrangements to stay there with us and come with us to Auschwitz.
It's amazing.
He's a darling boy, very darling boy.
Gita, thank you so much, Gita. It's unbelievable. Gita, you are an inspiration to all of us. You really are.
Kind of,
Not only inspiration, there are no words. There are just no words. Gita, you are, there's no one like you. You are unique.
I can say the same for you. Why do I think about you at night?
Oh, Gita, you're so funny. Gita, thank you so much.
I thank you very much.
Gita, this is a beautiful picture of your dear mother. So she herself buried that one young.
She never cried. She cried one time when she was caught by the SS, and she managed to hide and come out. And that's when she cried, because she didn't think she would come out of it. But she had so much energy, and she lived through so many tragedies in the family. With my sister, who lost her husband when she was 3 months pregnant. And a month later, this story I have to tell you.
This is and your mother she always kept her emunah.
I'm sorry?
She always kept her emunah. She always kept her.
She always taught emunah. She was not so very strict on everything, although she should have been. But emunah she had. And Hashem recognized it, must have recognized it, because the way that we had those miracles happening to us all the time.
Well, Gita, you had amazing family, and Baruch Hashem, you here, and your family is amazing.
And my 2 sisters, I'm telling you, I miss them so much. Both sides.
Baruch Hashem.
She's not half, she's not. I have a girl whom I befriended because she happened to come to my house. And she was born in a Christian house in Germany. And her name was Sarah. And she discovered that one of her grandparents, of her grandfathers, was part of the Shoah. So he knew that there was somebody Jewish, and she converted. And she became part of my family.
It's beautiful.
She's such a darling girl. She's 35. She came to Israel doing a postdoctoral study in Franz Kafka.
Wow.
And they accepted her. So she has a year in which she can do the postdoc. And I have her here. Oh, I have somebody else to call about a Shabbat meal.
It's amazing. Gita, thank you so much. Gita, you really are an inspiration to all of us. And it's the biggest honor and privilege to know you. And we just all love you, Gita. We all love you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you should just be well, and Bezrat Hashem, you'll speedy recovery, and you must continue the most amazing work that you do, Gita.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.